Tonight, unmasked, the alleged Chinese spy banned from the UK. Yang Tongbo has been named at the High Court after agreeing to have his anonymity lifted. The security ministers warn the case does not exist in a vacuum. Pressure for the UK to now designate China as a threat is ramping up. So far, ministers are promising that new powers to combat foreign agents is coming next year. Also tonight, a new report says survivors of sexual assaults are experiencing suicidal thoughts and PTSD because of delays in the court system. We'll hear from an MP leading a debate on the issue. Plus, Angela Rayner promises the biggest shake-up of local government in England for over 50 years to move power out of Westminster. But could it move power away from people? We'll ask the local growth minister. All that and more with Andrea Jenkins and John McDonnell, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. It's a spy story like something out of a thriller novel. The Chinese agent, the prince, the prime minister, all allegations, I should say, denied by the man in question. We'll be discussing the remarkable story of Yang Tongbo on the show tonight. But the politics of this case essentially come down to the same old story: security versus the economy. The foreign influence registration scheme is supposed to be in place next year, where people working for foreign governments need to be upfront about it so they can be put on a list. So effectively bringing spying out into the open. But this is the controversial bit, because there are two tiers, including an enhanced tier where nations deemed to be national security threats like North Korea go on. But should China be put on the enhanced tier? Now, some say if China isn't on the top tier, well, the scheme isn't worth the paper it's written on. Others warn that would hit trade and the economy and that all-important growth. We'll be discussing all of that on the programme tonight, but for days the alleged spy could only be referred to as H6. This afternoon, that changed. Here's Sky's home editor, Jason Farrell.
Yang Tongbo is the alleged Chinese spy who befriended a prince, whilst being linked to an organisation whose aims are to disrupt the UK. His relationship with the Duke of York, on the face of it, promoted British and Chinese companies, but was described as having a covert and clandestine element, with Mr. Yang accused of engaging in deceptive activity for the Chinese Communist Party.
It's clear that Prince Andrew has, unbeknownst to himself perhaps, been a risk to our national security, and naming H6 will send a shudder down many people's spine, the people who are in our elite, who are at the heart of our government.
That's because Mr. Yang appeared to have penetrated the British establishment, meeting Prime Ministers Theresa May and David Cameron while running his consultancy called Hampton Group International. Here on China Central Television, he says he met Mr. Cameron at a Chinese New Year reception at number 10. Amid threats to name him in Parliament, Mr. Yang asked for the restrictions on his identity to be lifted, insisting he's not a spy, but a legitimate businessman. But MPs say he's one of many agents with an ulterior motive.
Yang Tongbo at H6 was in fact not a lone wolf. He was one of some 40,000 members of the United Works Department, which the Intelligence Security Committee report last year said, and I quote, "and known to government, had penetrated every sector of the UK economy, spying, stealing intellectual property, influencing and shaping our institutions."
Mr. Yang was born in China in 1974. In 2002, he came to the UK to study, including at the University of York. In 2013, he was granted indefinite leave to remain. And through his consultancy connections, by 2020, he was attending Prince Andrew's 60th birthday party. But in November 2021, he was stopped at a port under counter-terrorism laws and asked to hand over digital devices. As a result of that, in March 2023, the Home Secretary directed he should be excluded from the UK on national security grounds. Evidence on his devices revealed his strong links, both with the Communist Party and with the Duke of York.
Where individuals pose a threat, as you would expect, the UK government is absolutely committed to using the full range of powers available to disrupt them. I raised these issues when I was in Beijing a few weeks ago. This case does not exist, sadly, in a vacuum. The UK is in the most complex threat environment that we've seen for a very significant time.
While Mr Yang has their pictures on his desk, both David Cameron and Theresa May say they don't know him and they've met thousands of people at numerous functions. But for Prince Andrew, whose aide told Mr Yang he was at the very top of the tree among his close confidants, this is harder to shake off. The Duke says nothing sensitive was discussed and he ceased contact when concerns were raised. But, disgraced again, he's off the invite list to Sandringham this Christmas. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, the revelations about Yang Tombora sparked questions for both Labour and the royal family, specifically Prince Andrew. We've got Liz Bates, our political correspondent, alongside our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills. Rhiannon, it's Prince Andrew again in the headlines.
And I think since Friday it would have been really difficult for the royal family. It's felt a little bit quieter this year when it comes to Prince Andrew. Yes, there's been interest in his finances, but I think what really made this story erupt, really, is the fact that Prince Andrew was involved. Of course, he had his fall from grace when it came to his links with Jeffrey Epstein. And this just seemed like another embarrassing twist when it comes to his judgment, really. Yeah, interesting that we think that he is the one who's decided that he's not going to go to Sandringham for Christmas, alongside his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. They did go last year. Some people saw it as a kind of thawing of relationships with the king. We don't know why he's decided not to go. A palace insider said to me, well, maybe he's done the honourable thing, but the big question is still over whether he's going to go to a royal family lunch, which happens on Thursday. That's taking place at Buckingham Palace, which ultimately is seen as monarchy HQ. I think palace insiders are hoping that once again he does the honourable thing and decides not to go, because even though it's a family occasion and he's not been left out in the cold by the family, we see that normally every Christmas. But the problem with this is an event happening at monarchy HQ, and the optics of him driving through the gates looks terrible. And I think this is the problem for the royal family. They are finding it very hard to shift the problem that is Prince Andrew. He would argue, of course, I gave up my contacts with this Chinese businessman as soon as I was told that I had to. There are still so many questions about his finances, his past business links, when he was trade envoy, and that isn't going away for the royal family.
Oh, thank you, Rhiannon. And it's also a political problem for the Prime Minister as well.
It is, and I think it does raise broader questions about the UK's relationship with China, and we've seen that play out many times before over many years, and that relationship has shifted and changed. There was a specific issue that came up. First of all, pressure building up, I think, from MPs today on the specific issue of naming this alleged spy, and eventually he was named, and that gagging order was removed. MPs were suggesting they were going to do it in the House of Commons. There was then an urgent question, and other issues, I think, have come out of this. One of those was the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, as it's called, and you talked about that at the beginning of your programme. This is a way that the UK government expects that it can kind of strengthen its structures against kind of foreign interference. And the suggestion from Conservative MPs today is that that is being delayed because they don't want to anger the Chinese. So again, that raises these kind of broader questions. We've seen from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, he has opened the door at the G20, had a meeting with President Xi. The Chancellor has plans to go to China early next year. So there's a bit of a softening of that relationship, and that, of course, has drawn criticism from Conservative MPs who say that this is very dangerous and that this specific case of the alleged spy has shown in very stark light what the dangers really are.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that a bit more with some of our guests as well. Thanks both very much indeed, Rhiannon and Liz. Well, as Liz was just saying about that scheme, for more on this, earlier I spoke to the Housing Minister, Alex Norris, and I did begin by asking him how he would characterise the UK's relationship with China.
Well, you know, China is an important player on the global stage, just like the UK is. You know, we compete with them where we need to, we cooperate with them where we need to, and of course we challenge them if there are moments to do that. And that's, you know, the relationship that we have with them and our standing on the global stage.
I mean, the reason I'm asking this is obviously because of a alleged spy that has been named, more about his movements coming out, and there is a debate now about the foreign influence registration scheme, something that we know that the Labour government intends to implement in the summer. It's effectively like a register for spies. So if you're working for a government, you've got to be upfront about it. It shouldn't be done in the shadows. That's the idea. My question is, should China be on the enhanced tier of that scheme?
Well, it's important, first of all, that we have such a scheme. We should know if individuals are here because they're working for other countries, that should be something we know about. You know, the scheme is under design. There was a commitment from the Security Minister in Parliament this afternoon to move on this at pace. I wouldn't want to prejudge any decisions taken as part of that process. They will be based on the evidence that's available to us. They'll be based on the best intelligence we've got, and we'll make those decisions at that point.
I mean, you've asked the easier question there about why the scheme is important. You know, that there's no disagreement on that. The argument is whether or not China should be part of the enhanced tier. So, in other words, the upper tier for countries that are deemed to be a threat to national security, like North Korea. Will China be on that enhanced tier? What's your view?
Well, it's right that we have different tiers for, you know, what the intelligence is saying as in terms of threat, in terms of countries that are particularly active or seeking to be active in this country. I can't at this moment, before the scheme is launched, make a decision or prejudge who is going to be in what tier.
Tom Tugendhat says that, you know, the security services in the UK are saying that actually the scheme's completely worthless if China isn't in the enhanced tier.
No, I mean, and I listened to Tom very closely, you know, of course, formerly a security minister himself. I might gently say that, you know, they promised this scheme and didn't bring one forward. We're trying to now, you know, finish that work and get it done at pace. So I think he would accept that we need to do it, but also to do it properly, based on the best intelligence available. And I think prejudging or second-guessing that without access to that is probably unwise. So we're getting on with that work now. As I say, there was a commitment made in Parliament about pace this afternoon, and that's what we're doing.
Was it a mistake for Keir Starmer to recently meet with the Chinese president, the first British Prime Minister to do that for 6 years?
No, I think the British public and people watching the show, Sophie, would expect our Prime Minister to engage with countries all around the world, and have seen him do that as part of our standing on the global stage. There are many communities, including my own in Nottingham, that have links through academia to China. There are many firms that trade in China or import from China. It is right that our Prime Minister engages in that way, but we've established the principles on which we're going to do it. Yes, we'll compete on the global stage where we need to. We'll cooperate when it's in our national interest. But when we have to have those difficult, challenging conversations, that's what we'll do. And, you know, I think that that's the approach the British people would expect us to take, and that's the one that we think will serve us well.
Alex Norris there. Well, he was mentioned in that interview. And with us now is the former Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat. So you're calling for China to be put on the foreign influence registration scheme. Just explain why.
Well, every country would be on the scheme. I mean, that's just about foreign influence. The question is whether you're on the ordinary scheme, in which case you just have to register if you're lobbying an MP or a politician like me, or whether you should be on the enhanced scheme, in which case you'd have to be more public about your activities. And the reason the enhanced scheme is so important is because the truth is the United Front Work Department, as we've just seen in the recent stories over the weekend, isn't just about targeting MPs, it's also about targeting academics, business people, even, we now find out, members of the royal family. So this is about a much wider scheme, and that's why it's so important that China is on the enhanced scheme. And Alex is right, you know, this is something that we've needed to get going for a while. I tried to bring it in. The election came a little bit sooner than I expected, otherwise it would have been in place by November.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned, he's got a point, hasn't he? He's like, look, it's a bit rich that people are moaning at us for not bringing it into the summer. The Conservatives were in power for 13 years and didn't do it.
As you know, Sophie, I was Security Minister for 2 years, and in that 2 years I brought in the National Security Act and FIRS, so forgive me, my time was pretty full doing both of those, and it would have been in place had the election come in November, as I think you and I were both expecting.
Yeah, that's true. Let's talk a little bit more about China, because the reason I was keen to talk to you this evening is because of something that you said today in the House of Commons. You said that MI5 told you that China should be formally designated as a threat to the UK, and that if China isn't in the advanced tier, it's not worth having.
Sorry, I didn't say that it should formally be designated a threat to the UK. I said it should be in the enhanced tier, otherwise the first scheme is not really worth it.
That's what that tier is.
That tier is for anybody who poses a challenge to us or who is launching that level of state-level attack. So you can describe it how you like, but you're using words that I didn't use. So that's why
you're saying that MI5 told you that China should be in that advanced tier.
Yeah.
What did they say?
Well, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but it was absolutely clear in all the advice I got that the enhanced tier was the appropriate one for China because of the level of challenge, because of the level of threat that we're facing from them.
And you brought it up.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's why
you said it, so it's a bit...
That's why I'm using I'm just being careful on the language I'm using rather than you putting words in my mouth.
I understand that, but I'm just
all.
trying to understand what they said to you. What was it that they said?
So exactly what I have said, which is that the first scheme, which is designed to create the starting point for intelligence work, to create that starting point to understand what kind of action is going on, is incredibly important, particularly for a state that is already through the UFWD, through the Ministry of State Security, which is their version of, if you like, the foreign espionage bloc, is already active in this country. So having that ability to build up that pattern of life, that pattern of activity in the United Kingdom is incredibly important. And what we really need to see is China absolutely listed on that so that we can build up that information. Because, you know, intelligence work is about finding a needle in a haystack, as the expression goes. And if you don't have the haystack, you can't find the needle. And the first scheme is about building up the data, building up the picture so that you have that haystack in which you can find the needles and the patterns of life.
So Labour haven't been clear yet about whether or not China will be in the enhanced tier. If they don't put China in the enhanced tier, is the conclusion we can draw that they've been disregarding the advice of the security services?
Well, frankly, I'd say they've been reckless if they're not going to do that, because it is perfectly clear that the United Front Work Department is already targeting the UK. You heard Ian Duncan-Smith talking about many thousands of different operators within it, and not all of them targeting the UK, of course, and operating with a budget of some $3 billion. We've already seen the activity. You've seen a little bit of it reported over the weekend, and it's been particularly sensational because it involves Prince Andrew. But the truth is, actually, this is involving academics and business people, journalists even, Sophie, and politicians. You know, we saw the report about Barry Gardiner a little while ago. You know, there's been a whole series of activity around this area that we really need to take seriously. And that's exactly why I did so much to bring in this scheme, because we really need to see it to keep the British people safe, to keep our economy safe, and to make sure we have that building block for intelligence protection.
The other aspect to this is the impact on the economy. As always with China, it's a balance between the security and the economy. And there have been reports that there's been a lobbying attempt by business, by banks, to say, look, if China's put in the enhanced tier, then that is going to impact the economy, it's going to impact trade, it's going to impact the way that we do business with China. And it's easy to say, look, national security should trump all of that, but look, the economy matters too, right? It's about the cost of living, it's about, you know, whether people have jobs. Doesn't that need to be taken into account too?
Of course it does. Absolutely it does. Which is why protecting British business from hostile state activity, the kind of corporate espionage that we've seen, stealing British technology, seeing jobs transferred to China, is all about part of that defence of the economy. This is absolutely key.
But you're making it sound like it's a simple debate, and it's not, right?
Sophie,
there are losses to it as well, right?
Well, there's challenges to it, right? And you know, and government is about making choices. And yes, you're right. You can have the quick access to a larger Chinese market. That's absolutely true. And you can see British cars already, or you can see solar panels already, or you can see wind turbines already having moved effectively in manufacturing all the way east. And you can see that pattern continue. Or you can stand up for British jobs and careers and defences and make sure that we are capable of building our own capabilities. And that's where alliances with friends and protecting the intellectual property, the ideas, the innovations, the creativity of the British people is so important.
OK, great to have you on the programme. As always, Tom Tugendhat, the former Security Minister, talking about that story on China. Well, the latest on the story of the Chinese spy is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Creer, and The Sun's deputy political editor, Ryan Saby. Right, let's bring in a duo for the evening, shall we? The former Conservative MP has now joined Reform UK, Andrew Jenkins, and the former Shadow Chancellor and Independent MP, John McDonnell. Great to have you both on the programme. John, what's your take on this?
Spying goes on all the time. We do it as well. Let's be realistic about that. And so what you have to do is make sure your intelligence services are monitoring all the time, reporting to the relevant government politicians, and you take fine judgments. And at different times, things can change as well. I can remember George Osborne had a big China love-in, really. I did that worst joke possible with throwing him a little red book to read.
This.
Yeah, my jokes always go wrong, I tell you. But I was saying to him, be careful what you do, because actually China negotiates like anyone else. If they're doing something, they expect something back. And at that point in time, I was worried about industrial espionage in particular, but there are real issues like that where you have to take a fine judgment. And at the moment, they've been caught out at a very low level, but they have been caught out, so you have to respond to that.
Just to ask, because you were talking about the love-in with George Osborne, we've obviously also seen Keir Starmer meet with the Chinese president. Is that the right thing to do, do you think?
Well, I think you have to have a political relationship. You can develop an economic relationship, but you have to be really careful about who's exploiting who. And sometimes, you know, there are some issues that override that. I'll give you two issues that I've been campaigning on recent years. One is the Uyghur issue, about the absolute oppression of the Uyghurs. But then secondly, trade unions in Hong Kong. I've had trade unionists who are friends of mine who are now in prison, have been in prison for nearly 3 years, and at the moment are being tried simply for being trade unionists. So sometimes when you have a relationship with a country like that, you have to be firm as well. And you have to be honest with them, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And what's not acceptable is having a big spying operation on here that it could damage our economy. And then you take the relevant sanctions.
Andrew.
When I was the Skills Minister, Universities Minister, I was tasked with bringing the Freedom of Speech Bill through, which was, I think, is an important part of legislation. And 3 months ago, Labour cancelled it. There was fears coming from the university that it would spoil their relationship with China, because they get a lot of Chinese students. And so I think this demonstrates, actually, I don't think the Labour government are actually going to do much about this. Now, when I was an MP, I also got contacted by a lot of, people came over from Hong Kong, feared about the Confucius Institute that was, infiltrating, allegedly, universities in the UK. So I think it goes a lot deeper. So I think, just as Tom and I would agree on many things, different wings of the party, my old party. But
I'll slip up there, maybe.
But I really think that, he had a good point, and we've got to take this seriously. And you mentioned the economy, Sophie, but that is clearly an important point. But I think that Trump will change things, and I think we need to be looking to Trump and America for building stronger relations and a trade deal with them.
I oppose that bill, but in that debate, it was quite clear that the role of the Chinese influence within universities was taking place. And I was surprised we hadn't debated that earlier. Where are the reports from MI5 on this, Yeah. And again, I think if you have a competent, active Secret Service here, those protections are put in place, but they have to be, I think, fine judgments have to be made over time as things change. And what attitude you take will be a judgment about what's the benefits to our country. You don't want to go back to Cold War relationships or anything like that. You want a working relationship, but at the same
relationship.
and you do not want them exploiting us. That's the whole point.
No, completely. Agree.
OK, thanks both very much indeed, Andrew and John there. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, we'll hear from the Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Service, who's told Sky News radical action is needed to clear the Crown Court backlog. And next, the Deputy Prime Minister announces plans to shake up local government, but will power really be moved out of Westminster? Stay with us for
now. Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, OK?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Sakulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the government set out major plans to redesign local government in England. If they're carried out, it could be the biggest shake-up for more than half a century. Now, the idea is that power will be shifted from here in Westminster to local authorities to give them more of a say over things like housing and transport. But there are claims it could lead to mega councils. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, launched the white paper on this issue earlier. Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, was there. So, Tamara, what's it all about?
Yes, in Leeds today, Angela Rayner set out some of the details of this big transfer of powers from Westminster out to the regions, which she said would put money in people's pockets and drive economic growth. Some big claims there. Now, most of England is actually already able to elect a metro mayor, if you include London, which is a slightly different arrangement. Half of the people in England are. She wants everyone in England to be able to elect their own mayor, and those mayors to have more powers, not just over local council type services, but also rail, also transport, and today additional powers over skills. Now, some mayors wanted even more than that. They wanted the power to raise certain taxes on their own. They don't have that yet, but she's hoping that this will be a step towards it. The other part of this reorganisation, though, is that the areas that don't have mayors, many of them have a system where they have two councils, a county council and then a district council, and there are about 160 of those. Now, she wants to get rid of those altogether. The government say that's inefficient, it's doubling up. They could save a lot of money by doing that. But I asked Angela Rayner whether what she thinks is that these councils are actually blocking growth, and this is what she said to me.
I don't think district councils are blockers. That's not what I'm trying to achieve. What I'm trying to achieve is scale, working with people. So looking at how we can have a place-based approach, because in areas, in towns and in rural areas, in different parts of the world, you don't stop at the council border. Many people work and travel amongst, and their healthcare is beyond their border, their jobs are beyond their border, of whether it's a district council or a metropolitan. So having that joined-up approach and working towards how you scale up that support, whether it's through growth or transport or health, I think is a really important push to say to people, let's go on this journey together.
So she says they're not. I think the concern that's been highlighted by some is that when you lose a tier of local government, yes, perhaps it may be easier for the bigger councils representing 500,000 people or more to make decisions to build more housing. But also it might take those decisions more remotely from the people they represent. People may feel the people who approve their extension or decide how often their bins are going to be collected are going to be more remote. This is the fear the Conservatives have highlighted about mega councils, although they did quite a lot of devolution themselves. So this is a reorganisation that can be controversial. Also, many parts of local government are really struggling financially, particularly social care, and there have been questions about whether a big reorganisation in which some councils might know that they're going to be abolished in the next couple of years is really going to help when so many areas need urgent attention.
And thank you very much, Tamara Cohen, speaking to us there. Well, I spoke about some of the issues that Tamara was just talking about with the Housing Minister, Alex Norris. Let's listen. OK, let's talk about the announcement that you're here to speak to us about. It's about local government. So what is the plan you're announcing?
Well, we're really excited. What we've announced today is the biggest transfer of power from Whitehall to Town Hall, certainly in my lifetime. It's about saying that we think that, local communities should have greater say over the things that impact them, whether that's over the rail services, bus services, housing, whether it's to do with employment, skills, business support, how we deal with climate change. Those decisions should be taken, locally, because local people are the experts and we'll get the best out of them. We've seen lots of success with mayors so far, and we want to see more of that across England. So today's announcement really moves that forward and means that no longer will it be a process that's, something that's agreed with ministers making backroom deals with local council leaders, but instead it's something everyone will have access to, and we want to see everybody get access to it. So, we're really excited. This is a huge part of our commitment to do things differently in this country.
I'm genuinely quite confused. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe here, because you're saying about devolution, you want to unleash devolution, you want to make devolution the default, but then you're also saying that absolutely, yes, the central government is going to push through any planning issues that we believe is going to help us meet our target of house building overriding local concerns. I just don't get it. What's going on?
Well, that's because that's not a fair characterisation, Sophie. That's not what we're doing at all. I think if you link what we're saying today with the really important announcements that we made on Thursday around the National Planning Policy Framework, what we're saying to communities is, yes, we have a huge national goal around house building, a very ambitious one, 1.5 million homes over the lifetime of this Parliament. That's what our country desperately needs. And everybody's going to have to take their fair share of it as part of a national effort. But at that point, what we're saying is we want local leadership. So we're saying to communities, this is how many houses you will need to have in your community. You say where they should be. You say where the infrastructure that best connects houses. You say where it's, the best places for your community. Have a local plan. At the moment, I think it's something like a third of the country is covered by a local plan. That means the rest of the country is vulnerable to speculative development. Through this mechanism, in service of a national goal, local communities can take real control of this. And now what we're saying is, with that mayoral system that we've got in this country, those mayors can get better access to capital, better access to work with Homes England to make sure that any decisions being taken about that region or sub-region will have local insight and local leadership. So it's genuinely a shift of power, but what it means is you have to get involved. And that starts with getting a local plan, and that's why every community really needs to do that. But those things are perfectly compatible.
The other thing I just want to ask about as well, talking about devolution, is that part of the plan today is to effectively kind of reorganise the structure, so do away with some of the smaller local authorities. And some people are also saying that goes against the idea of devolution. This is the District Councils Network. They've said, we're concerned that any creation of mega councils will prove the opposite of devolution, taking powers away from local communities. What would you say to that?
I mean, I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, first of all, we have all across the country, including, across London, including my own city, we have already unitary authorities. It's a well-established model that is something that's democratic, something that's accountable to its local community. What we're saying now is that in many areas, you might have a town and parish council, a district council, a county council, a combined authority, and a mayor, as well as national government. That is a lot of tiers of government. And what we're having, come forward to us is, districts in different parts of the country saying, actually, it's time to move on from this model. We think they're right. And what we're saying is for those who are ready to get on with it, we will get on with that process of helping them form a unitary authority. And then with those who aren't, we're going to have that conversation about, whether it really is sustainable now to have one system where, one local authority collects your rubbish and your other local authority disposes of your rubbish. Actually, is that the most efficient system? Or is it time to get those local authorities together, still accountable to the local population, delivering for local population, but more efficient, more effective? We think the time for that conversation is now. And again, we think that's the right thing.
My final question, lots of reorganisation. Are there going to be local elections in May?
Yes, there's absolutely going to be local elections in May. You know, there has been, as there was under the previous government, including in North Yorkshire, the then Prime Minister's backyard, there's been cases where if a local authority is changing and not going to exist, well, they haven't held immediate elections for that body. They've waited for the new body to be up and running to hold elections for it. That's, you know, an established principle that's been done in the past. But the reality is those local elections are scheduled for next year. They're going ahead next year. I'll be knocking lots of doors ahead of them next year. So yes, fans of democracy will get their fix on that first Thursday in May next year.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the show. Let's chat again to Andrea and John, shall we? Before we do, I just want to make a correction, because we described you as an independent MP earlier, and John is actually still a member of the Labour Party, but you've had the whip suspended.
That's it, yeah.
Right, Andrea.
Yes.
You, of course, are running to be Mayor of Lincolnshire. What's your view on these changes? Is it going to be, you know, a good idea because it's giving more power to local mayors and bigger local authorities, or do you have concerns?
It's down to leadership, to be honest, Sophie. You know, you get some great mayors, like we saw with the Police and Crime Commissioner. You know, one of them recently, only a couple of weeks ago, has gone in special measures. So it depends on local leadership and how they are good at planning and at managing the public finances. I mean, listening to Alex Norris there and Angela Rayner, you know, if I get elected and have that democratic mandate, because I'm running on a campaign to bring back common sense into politics and frugal, small c conservatism to make sure every pound of taxpayers' money is well spent.
You've got the pitch. No, take that one off.
Yeah, no, but seriously, it's a bit like Elon Musk is doing in America. I'd like to sort of do here. So I will make them eat their words. You know, let's see if I get elected whether they'll try and block what I would like to do.
So you're thinking maybe they're just trying to, if it's friendly mayors, if mayors they like, they'll give them all the powers.
Yes,
but
that's what I think. And also, I mean, there's what Alex said there was there's very much confusion regarding the white paper, because the way I sort of read about it earlier was that the local council elections could be deferred, and it's down to the local councils to decide. But the thing is, you know, both Conservatives and Labour are likely to defer it because neither are doing that great in the polls. So I think that's very undemocratic, less than 6 months before an election.
John, what's your take on all this? Because all parties talk a good game on devolution, don't they? But what do you make of these plans?
Yeah, my background's local government. That's why I was at the GLC as Chair of Finance there. Then I became a civil servant local government.
I was a local councillor as well, actually, in Lincolnshire.
I was the Chief Executive Associate in London Government, representing all the boroughs of all political parties. And I can understand why the government's gone down this path. And in some areas, the mayoralty has worked very effectively. Look at Andy Burnham up in Manchester, Sadiq Khan in London, and Stevie Rotherham in Liverpool. So it's worked very effectively, and I can see why they want to roll it out. The big issue for me is not necessarily the structures, it's the money. It's will they be properly funded? Will they not just have powers devolved?
And it's right, because Lincolnshire is actually only £24 million a year.
Well, if
that'll soon be gone, won't it?
If you devolve powers, you've got to devolve revenue-raising powers as well. I'm a big advocate of land value taxation, those sorts of issues that could come into the debate itself.
There'll be low taxation.
What I don't want to be is a situation where you're setting up these mayoralities and then they haven't got the resources to implement the policies they get elected upon. I think the government recognises that. But we want to see the devolution of these powers and resources rapidly, because to deliver in the limited timescale we've got between now and the next election, it's only 4 years, we want to hit the ground running, demonstrate actually these new structures can work effectively and actually change people's lives. You've seen what has happened where we've done it in the past, particularly around the economy, where you're investing in the transport as well as looking at how you can back businesses as well. But in addition to that, the big issue that's been raised is housing. We've got a housing crisis on our hands, and we desperately need the powers at the local level to be able to, and the resource at the local level to build the homes we need.
Interesting. Bit of agreement there. Thank you both very much indeed, Andrea and John. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. A warning that radical action is needed with the court's backlog at a record high. We'll be looking at the impact on victims of crime and hear from an MP leading a debate on this issue. welcome back. With court delays and backlogs reaching record highs and victims of crime waiting longer and longer for justice, radical action is needed. That's according to the Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Service. He spoke exclusively to Sky's Ashna Horinag.
A substantial sentence of imprisonment is inevitable in cases such as this.
Getting justice took Vicky Crawford almost 6 years. She reported historical sexual abuse in 2018, but the trial only went ahead in March this year after being delayed 6 times.
With every hearing, like every court date, I was nervous and anxious. I had a headache, felt sick, couldn't sleep. The run up to it was awful. I had nightmares, panic attacks in the middle of the night. I'd wake up having panic attacks. Just couldn't eat. Just felt awful.
The waiting for your day in court can be as distressing as the crime itself. It is why Vicky wants to share her story.
The reason I'm waiving my anonymity is because there are thousands of people just like me, look like me, talk like me, think like me, have the same experiences that I'm having in the court system, but nobody puts a face to those people. So this is me.
A system that the Chief Inspector of the Crown Prosecution Service watchdog says is under unprecedented strain, and only bold action will break the backlog.
The Crown Prosecution Service are under the greatest pressure I've ever seen in 25 years of the existence of the Inspectorate. And actually the thing that worries me more is I can't see an end to it. I can only see an increasing backlog. So something has to happen, but that something has to probably be radical.
What does radical look like? You mentioned radical solutions.
Radical could be anything from removing the right of election to jury trial. It could be looking at an intermediate court between the Magistrates' Court and the Crown Court. You know, radical could literally mean changing the way that we look at the criminal justice system.
And reform like this isn't off the table, as the government considers a justice overhaul being led by former High Court Judge Sir Brian Leveson. In a once-in-a-generation review of the court system in England and Wales, offences could be reclassified and moved to the magistrates' courts. When offences are too serious for the magistrates but not serious enough for Crown courts like this one, we could see the introduction of new intermediate courts made up of a judge and magistrates. It may mean an end to jury trials for some offences, a solution the Chief Inspector would support.
If you did that and took out 20 or 30,000 cases out of a backlog and there still has to be a court, but you could start moving cases and having a simplest cases magistrate court, more serious cases with probably a judge and 2 lay members in an intermediate court, and then Crown Court reserved for the more serious offences, rape, murder, manslaughter, the terrorism. That is radical. That would solve the problem.
A drastic shake-up of the system that for many can't come soon enough. But to resolve it, they may need to be radical. Ashna Horinag, Sky News.
Ashna Horinag there on the Crown Court backlog. Well, later on this evening, there's going to be a debate on court delays and in particular on victims of sexual violence in the House of Commons. And Labour's Mary Glindon is an MP who's raised this issue. She joins us now. Thanks very much for being on the programme.
Thank you.
We wanted to get you on because we know that this is an issue you're going to be pushing later in the House of Commons. Just explain why.
Well, it's an issue that has affected and will continue to affect many girls and women and girls in my constituency. And the fact that something terrible has happened to you, something you can't get over, and when you do get the courage to take it to up the stage where you're having a case about it, which is a big step in itself, and when it eventually gets to the stage of going to Crown Court and you're all psyched up, you go the night before, you're ready. Many people say they can't eat, they can't sleep. I think that was demonstrated in your video. And then you arrive at court the next morning and you're told it's cancelled. And that's your life on hold, mental health.
And it can take years as well, right? It can take years, we're talking.
We're talking several years, and not just one cancellation and waiting years, time after time, 6, 7 times over years, and it has a debilitating effect on people's ability to work, to function, on their families. And I just think, you know, as a mother of a woman, well, I'm a woman, that, or any mother, the feeling that your child's going through that, you've experienced that something terrible happened to them, and then you're watching them suffer and literally deteriorate because their lives they can't move on. And the worst thing too is that people will say, well, all the while, the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator, probably the perpetrator, is living their life and getting on with things, and that, you know, that there's nothing happened to them and they can have a happier life.
You mentioned about your constituents, and obviously I know how important anonymity is here, so I really don't want you to breach any confidences or anything. But you've obviously spoken to people who have had a real emotional impact on you, that's affected you, and I just wondered if you wanted to talk a bit more about that.
I think when... It's like anything. When you meet anybody who's had a terrible experience, something you haven't experienced yourself, it's that coming face to face with the person. It's fine hearing it from you on the news or reading it in a newspaper, but when you meet a person and then it's that different interaction when you see somebody's demeanour or the family with them and you see how upset they are. And that's the reason that I wanted to have the debate. I didn't know how to help, and I thought if it could be aired in Parliament, because sometimes what they need now, when they haven't got justice, is someone to listen and to speak out for them. And we know that things are happening, but I still think we have to have these kind of debates to keep fresh in MPs' minds that out there people are suffering every single day, every minute.
I mean, it's such an important issue, it really is. We've done quite a lot on the programme about it as well, and it is something that, you know, we take really seriously. You say that things are happening. What you want to see is, I think I'm right in saying, sexual violence claims fast-tracked through the courts. Is that right? And is that... What's the government saying on that?
Well, you know, the government have set up this review with Brian Levison, and they've got the group that's looking at improvement to the court. That's great, but at the moment, the backlog is 73,000 of cases, and 11,500 of them are sexual. 11,500 are sexual.
I mean, we
assault.
saw courts sitting all night during the riots.
Yeah,
right? I mean, is that the kind of thing you'd like to see?
But the government have, thank goodness, increased the sittings by 500, which is really good. But 500 days extra sitting, I should have said, and that is good. But hopefully, what we need out the review, that's not going to help people immediately, like my constituents, but it gives them hope. And they do. I think there's something that comes out when you meet people who've suffered and who are suffering. They want to tell their story because they don't want it to happen to other people, and so they have a long-term view as well, despite what's going on for them. They're so brave. But, you know, we need to see the system. We've got to see it quickened. And also, there's the issue where barristers can delay a court case on, just say, it has to be passed by a judge, but they could say, I'm sick, we had the strikes, you know, we've had the pandemic, but I'm asking the Minister to look a bit more at the scrutiny of the barristers asking for an adjournment again, or you know, a delay in the trial.
So if they're trying to basically kind of pull the wool slightly.
Well, that, you know, we'll make that presumption. I don't want to get done by any barrister.
No. We're talking about it in the round. You're not making any specifics here.
Sorry, it's not a thing to jest about, but really, you know, it seems if the defence can have someone say, well, we can't do it today, that doesn't help anyone, especially the victim.
Thank you very much indeed. You're obviously a very strong advocate in behalf of the constituent that you've met, so thank you very much. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Angela Rayner is set to move into a new pad in Whitehall, Admiralty House, which was once used by none other than Winston Churchill. We'll discuss the perks that come with high office after the break.
Good evening. Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, we'll have the latest as that alleged Chinese spy with links to Prince Andrew is named. He's called Yang Tengbo. Also ahead, a new crisis for the Church of England as the Archbishop of York now faces calls to resign. And why your Brussels sprouts might be a bit bigger and a bit better this Christmas Day. All that and more on the UK Tonight at 8.
How are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Connor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate. How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Connor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first. Hello, welcome back. Now, if you read the papers over the weekend, you might have seen that the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, is moving house, but not just any old top two down. She's been given the use of a flat right here in Westminster, inside Admiralty House. Now, once upon a time, it was the home of none other than Winston Churchill. But of course, she's not the first and she won't be the last Secretary of State to gain such a dwelling. We've got our chief politico, watcher of all things politics, John Craig, resident political historian, here with us. John, talk us through, what's this?
It's the bit on the right-hand side of the picture
shadow.
here. Yeah, in the shadows, yes. Admiralty House, yes, it's when Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty. All sorts of politicians have lived there over the years. I remember interviewing John Major there, where he moved in there when Downing had the builders in 10 Downing Street. But for controversially, and perhaps salaciously perhaps, it's where John Prescott, when he was Deputy Prime Minister, entertained Tracy Temple, which, of course, various people have recalled since Mr Prescott died recently. Yeah, I mean, there are 3 flats in there for government ministers. Secretary of State for Defence has a flat in there most of the time as well, but lots of ministers have had it over the years.
Right, let's look at a couple more, shall we? Because I think we can see...
I think Dorney Wood's next. Is that Dorney Wood? I think that's Dorney Wood.
There is Dorney Wood.
Now, what you don't see there is the croquet lawn. Talking of Mr Prescott, when Tony Blair was on a trip to Washington, Mr Prescott played croquet there and he was forced to give it up.
I love it. And let's bring in quickly Andrew and John, shall we? Which pad would you go for if you got a chance?
That'd be amazing, that one.
Be quite nice, this one, don't you reckon? What do you think, John?
With lots of dogs I'd have as well.
Fancy a game of croquet?
When I was Shadow Chancellor, they were all talking to me, well, you'll move into number 11 if elected. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm staying at home. And they said, well, what would we do with this? I said, well, we've got lots of our security staff who've been outsourced on low wages, struggling to get a roof over their heads. Put one of their families in there. He'd have moved in. They all say that.
You're right.
I'm not going to move into Downing Street. Let's have a look at Chevening. Chevening, Foreign Secretaries, there was a big tussle between... Is that Dominic Raab?
I don't know who...
Not sure.
I'm not
anyway,
sure.
there was a battle between Dominic Raab and Liz Truss, both of whom were served as over who should have that. Robin Cook took Gaynor Regan
honestly
there.
And Margaret Cook was very cross about it in her memoirs.
We're in danger.
Geoffrey Howe got the hump when he lost it as well.
We're
Margaret
in danger
Thatcher.
of crashing off
Margaret
air
Thatcher
here.
took it
We're
off him.
about to crash off air. We can't get John to, he's in his
mentioned checkers.
element. Haven't got
Checkers
time.
has got a pool and
Next
tennis
time.
courts.
See you tomorrow.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news. Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.